So we've talked before about there being 4 ways to represent functions. We said that ordered pairs was a way, and a table, and a graph, and mapping. Today we're going to talk about a 5th way to represent functions, and that 5th way is using equations, more specifically linear equations today. So with equations, we've got to talk about how do we then take that equation and represent that function as a graph and as a table. We don't necessarily do it as mapping, but we can represent it the other 2 ways. So what we do is we are given this equation, y equals 3x minus 8 in our first example, and then here we're told the domain that we want to use for this equation. So they tell us that we want the domain to be -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. That does not mean that these are the only x values that exist for that domain. It just means that we're going to only use those 5, and typically we want 5, 2 negative, 0, and 2 positive. So we create this xy table. This part in the middle isn't necessary to include in the table, but the substitution that we're going to do in here should be included somewhere. So if you want to make just a regular XY t-chart and then do your substitutions off to the side, you totally can do that. We're going to list the domain that they gave us in the x column because we know domain means x's. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take those numbers and we're going to substitute them in for the x values. So y equals 3 times -2 minus 8. And then we go through on our calculator, type that in, 3 times -2 minus 8, and we end up getting -14. And we'll go through and we'll do that for each of the following ones. So go ahead and write your substitutions, then take your calculator and type those things into your calculator, and then verify that the y values you get are the same y values I got. So 3 times -1 is -3, minus 8 is -11. Okay, so take a minute, use your calculator, check my math, and then we're going to move to taking one of the x values, -2, with its matching y value, -14, and we're going to graph those 2 coordinates as an ordered pair for this equation. So in order to do this, we want to label our y-axis and x-axis always first, and then we're going to go to the left 2 and then down 14. Now unfortunately our grid only goes down to 10, so all we would do is just extend this grid by drawing more grid marks going down, and then we graph that point on the -14 grid mark. And we do the same thing for -11, so to the right or to the left 1 and down 11, we only go down 10. We put that grid mark right here, so we're going to put the point right next to it, and then 0, -8, and then 1, -5, and 2, -2. Okay, so you've graphed all 5 points. When we graph these 5 points, they are the ones we use in the table, but they're not the only numbers that work for this equation. So we need to represent this equation as being what's called a linear equation. The way we do that is we take a straight edge, so you guys can get a ruler or your agenda or another piece of paper or the calculator and use it as a straight edge to connect these 5 points. Connecting these 5 points forms a line, and that line represents the linear equation we were given. The nice thing is, a pro tip, if it's not a line, you messed up. So your pro tip for this type of thing is that it should always be a line. If it's not a line, you messed up. Okay, no line equals mess up. And you got to find the mess up, Typically it's pretty easy to do because if you messed up on one, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb, and the other ones will be lined up. That's why we use 5 instead of 2 or 3 or 4. It shows us indefinitely which point we mess up on. So we're going to fix it if it's not aligned. Now let's take a look at the next example. Y equals 1/2 x plus 4. So here they give us a domain of -4, -2, 0, 2, and 4. So interesting. It's still 2 negatives, 0, and 2 positives. We'll talk about after we graph it why it's going to look like that. So we're going to take those numbers and we're going to write them in the x column of our xy table. So create your xy table and then write your x values in the x column. We always like to put them in ascending order. It's just an easy way to organize. And then we're going to substitute in. So again, 1/2 times -4 plus 4, and then 1/2 times -2 plus 4, so on and so forth. So just substitute all those numbers in, and then I'll pull up my graphing calculator just to remind you again how you substitute or plug in a fraction. Okay, so here's my graphing calculator. We wanted to substitute in 1/2 times -4 plus 4. So to get to that fraction, we go to the math menu, and then we scroll over to this FRAC menu. So you can go left 1 or right 4 times, and then the first option is n over d. So we hit that n over d, and it creates a fraction for us. We type in 1, and then the down arrow, and then the 2. And then in order to get out of that fraction to do the multiplication, you have to hit the right arrow. And then we hit multiply by -4. Make sure you use the negative sign. And then add 4. And then we hit enter. That's going to get us 2. So we would write that 2 over here. Now I'll show you another pro tip trick with your calculator. Instead of doing that entire process over again, all you have to do is hit second and then enter. And it pulls up that same entry that you typed in previously. And then you can scroll over to the -4 and just replace that with -2. So it's much easier. You're able to type in things, if it's the same entry multiple times, much quicker than having to go through that whole process again. Then you hit enter. You don't even have to scroll over, and it'll give you 3. So we write 3. Do it one more time just to show you. So again, second, enter. It pulls up the last entry. You scroll over to -2. Make sure it's over the negative or the 2. Type 0. The issue is that 0 has less symbols than -2, so we need to get rid of that 2. So as long as it's hovered over the 2, you can hit the delete button and that 2 disappears. And then you can hit enter, and that gives you your answer. So go ahead and finish that up for the next 2 entries. When you do that, you should get these 2 numbers. And then we're going to go ahead and graph those as ordered pairs. Make sure you label your y-axis and your x-axis first. We start at the origin. We go left 4 and up 2. My suggestion would be trying these and pausing the video and then seeing if what I did is what you did, just to make sure. Alright, now that you've checked your points, we want to make sure that we represent the entire equation, not just the 5 domain and range values that we found. So we take a straight edge and we connect these points with a line to show that this line goes on and on forever and it has infinite solutions. Okay, so check your line. It should look like this. And then let's talk about a pro tip for y. They chose those 4 numbers, okay? So anytime you have a fraction coefficient, so that means on your x there's a fraction. So a fraction coefficient means that you're going to choose slightly different numbers. So fraction coefficient equals multiples of the denominator. So here, my denominator was 2, So I choose 2 and 4. I always choose 0 because 0 plays nice. Anything times 0 is 0, so it doesn't matter what fraction you have, you're always going to get 0. And then I choose the opposites of the 2 positives I have. So 2 negatives, 0, 2 positives. And those 2 negatives should be opposite of those 2 positives. It's different from when you have a whole number coefficient. In this last example with whole number coefficients, we just always choose -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. So for the next example, they didn't give us the domain, so you have to figure out, okay, well, is it a fraction coefficient? Do I need multiples of the denominator? Or is it a whole number coefficient? Do I just choose -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2? Here, I have a 3, that's a whole number coefficient, so I'm always going to use -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. So go ahead and pause the video. I want you to do your work and then replay the video to see what you should have gotten. All right, welcome back. So hopefully your process went well. Here's what you should have gotten for your table and your graph. So double check your x values, double check your y values, double check where your points are. I put them in blue so that you could see them easy, and make sure that you drew a line with arrows on the end to represent the whole equation, and then labeled your x and y axes. Let's take a look at the next example. So y equals -2x plus 3. Do I have a fraction or a whole number coefficient? Hopefully you said whole number, so that means we're using -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. Again, pause the video, try the example, and then check back when you are done with the table and the graph. Alright, so let's take a look at what you should have gotten for the table and the graph. Check your x values, check your y values, check your points, and make sure that you put a line through those points with arrows on the end. Remember, if you didn't get a line, that means you messed up somewhere. Find the one that looks like it's out of place, find its coordinates on the table, and see what you did wrong with your math. Take a look at the last example. So we've got y equals 1/3 x plus 4. So again, we need to create our x and y table. You can do your substitutions off to the side, or you can put your substitutions in the middle of the x and the y. Right here you should see that you have a fraction coefficient with a denominator of 3, so that means we're choosing 3 and 6 and -3 and -6, so we like to put those in ascending order, -6, -3. We always choose 0 no matter what, 3 and 6. So go ahead and take a few minutes, pause the video, do your operations with the calculator, graph your line, and then check back. Alright, so let's take a look at what you did. Here is the table completed with your substitutions and your graph. Check your x and y values in that table, check your substitutions, and then also make sure that your points are in the correct location with a line going through it with arrows on the end and your x and y axes labeled. So that's basically it for graphing with a table. You're ready to start the practice. Please let me know if you have any questions as you're going through it.